Chapter 1. The Weight of Gears. The rain in Lower Meridian was a greasy, metallic affair, reflecting the sickly glow of the neon signs advertising protein paste and robotic repair. It clung to the corrugated iron roofs and slicked the cobblestone streets, carrying the scent of burnt oil and desperation. Julian Vane, or Jules as he was currently known, a designation Head reluctantly adopted after a particularly bruising encounter with a particularly aggressive wrench, didn't notice. He was lost in the rhythmic, almost hypnotic, turning of the Central Transit Hub's primary chronometer. The machine was a behemoth, a tangle of brass and steel the size of a small house, its gears grinding a relentless, deep-throated song. It dictated the flow of Lower Meridian's entire public transit system, buses, trams, even the automated freight lines, and Jules' job was to keep it humming. Officially, he was a mechanical synchronization specialist, a title so absurdly bureaucratic it made him choke on his synthetic breakfast paste. In reality, he was a grease-stained ghost, a shadow flitting through the underbelly of a city that prized efficiency above all else. He moved with a practiced awkwardness, his movements deliberate, almost ritualistic, as he cleaned a particularly stubborn pinion gear. The scent of machine oil was a balm to his perpetually buzzing mind, a distraction from the suffocating weight of expectation that clung to him like the rain. Expectations had deliberately buried beneath layers of grime, stuttering speech, and a profound aversion to eye contact. "You look like you're having a seizure, Jules," Marcus Graves, Superintendent Graves' son, a wiry, perpetually sneering youth with a disconcerting habit of holding wrenches, said, leaning against a support beam. Marcus was the chief tormentor, a tiny, spiteful engine of relentless annoyance. Had perfected the art of making Jules feel utterly worthless. "Sorry," Jules mumbled, his voice still retaining a slight, unnatural cadence, a lingering echo of the temporal stillness training that was, thankfully, now mostly dormant. He wiped his oil-slicked hands on a ragged gray canvas cover. Just concentrating. Concentrating on what? The existential dread of being a glorified grease monkey. Marcus chuckled, a sharp, unpleasant sound. He deliberately dropped a heavy wrench, aiming for the space just above Jules' head. Jules instinctively flinched, a fleeting spasm of reflexes, remnants of a far more potent ability that Marcus clearly enjoyed observing. Time is money, Jules. And those who grease the gears are just the grease themselves. He spat on the floor, a blatant display of contempt. Jules didn't respond. He couldn't. Years of rigorous training, of suppressing the instinctive urges, of meticulously crafting a false identity, had taught him the brutal necessity of silence. Just then, a low, comforting voice cut through the mechanical din. "Julian, you're using too much oil. You'll clog the mechanism." It was Sophie, the blind watchmaker. Her shop, a tiny, cluttered space nestled in a darkened corner of the subway tunnels, was a refuge from the relentless grind of Lower Meridian. It smelled of beeswax, polished brass, and something vaguely floral, a secret she guarded fiercely. Sophie's shop was a pocket of warmth in the cold, industrial heart of the city. She didn't see the stuttering, grease-stained youth. She heard the precise, unwavering beat of his heart, the subtle shifts in his energy that revealed a mind far more attuned to the flow of time than any of the city's engineers. She offered him a warm cup of herbal tea and a slice of oat cake, her movements gentle and assured. "You always look so tired, Julian," she said, her voice a warm, melodic rumble. "Rest your eyes. The gears don't need you to see them." "Infine," Jules mumbled, taking the tea. He hadn't realized how parched he was. Marcus, sensing a disruption in his torment, added, "Look at him, Sophie. Probably dreaming of miniature clockwork kingdoms. Waste of talent. That's what it is." Sophie simply raised an eyebrow, a gesture that conveyed a far greater level of displeasure than her lack of sight would suggest. She picked up a delicate pocket watch, examining its intricate workings with a practiced touch. "This timepiece," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, is a symphony of precision. It tells not just the time, but the very pulse of the city. Julian felt a strange pull, a faint echo of the temporal stillness, a fleeting sense of control over the surrounding chaos. It was a dangerous, instinctive reaction, a reminder of the power he had sworn to suppress. He quickly forced himself to focus on the task at hand, scrubbing at the grime with a renewed intensity. As he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was merely delaying the inevitable. The grand jubilee of progress was approaching, a lavish celebration of Lower Meridian's industrial advancements, orchestrated by Superintendent Graves. And Jules knew, with a chilling certainty, that this jubilee would be the catalyst for a reckoning head been dreading a moment when his carefully constructed facade would shatter, revealing the truth about who he really was. Chapter 2. Echoes of Stillness. The rhythmic clang of the transit hub was a familiar, almost hypnotic drone. But today, it pressed against Julian's nerves like a physical weight. The air hung thick with the smell of oil, burnt metal, and the nervous energy of the Jubilee preparations, a chaotic swirl of bunting, oversized gears, and overly enthusiastic city officials. Marcus, predictably, was a constant, grating presence, a smear of smugness and barely contained malice. He was currently attempting to demonstrate his mechanical prowess by repeatedly dropping a wrench at Julian's feet, yelling, "Faster, grease brain! Time is slipping away." Julian ignored him, meticulously cleaning the intricate mechanisms of a massive transit clock. He wasn't simply performing a job, he was attempting to quiet the insistent whisper of temporal stillness, the power that pulsed beneath his skin like a trapped heartbeat. Had learned, through years of agonizing training, to suppress it, to bury it beneath layers of mundane tasks and carefully constructed normalcy. But the closer the Jubilee approached, the stronger the pull became, a siren song promising both terrifying potential and a desperate need to understand it. Sophie, as always, was a calming anchor. She sat patiently at her workbench, meticulously polishing the faces of dozens of pocket watches. The faint scent of lavender and beeswax clung to her, a subtle counterpoint to the industrial tang of the subway. "You are concentrating deeply, Jules," she observed, her voice gentle and perceptive. "It is a commendable endeavor. But even the most intricate clock requires a moment to rest." "Just cleaning," Julian muttered, wiping his brow with a grimy rag. Trying to keep things running smoothly. He deliberately focused on the feel of the brass under his fingers, the precise pressure required to dislodge a stubborn piece of rust. It was a practiced discipline, a mental shield against the overwhelming urge to stop the world. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the main entrance. A group of uniformed security guards, recently employed by the Vane executive fleet, a detail Julian hadn't realized was arriving until this moment, were attempting to direct the flow of the increasingly frantic crowd. Marcus, predictably, seized the opportunity. He shoved past a bewildered guard, deliberately scattering a tray of promotional pamphlets about Lower Meridian's innovative gears. "Look at this, Sophie," he bellowed, his voice dripping with triumph. "The genius greaser can't even manage a simple pamphlet. A disgrace." He deliberately positioned himself behind Julian, using his body as a shield, effectively trapping him. Julian felt the familiar surge of pressure in his chest, a tightening of his muscles, a sharpening of his senses. The guards, sensing a disruption, began to close in, their faces hard and expectant. He forced himself to breathe slowly, focusing on the rhythmic ticking of a nearby watch, Sophie's watch, a deliberate attempt to ground himself. And then, without conscious thought, he moved. It wasn't a rush, not an explosion of speed. It was more like a subtle shift in the air, a momentary suspension of everything around him. The shouted orders of the guards faded, the clatter of the crowd softened, and the guards themselves seemed taubler. The world wasn't stopped, not entirely, but it was slowed, drastically so, to a crawl. He moved with an unnerving grace, his movements precise and economical, as if he were navigating a dream. He disarmed the first guard with a swift, almost surgical strike, unclenching the guard's grip on his baton and sending it spinning uselessly across the floor. The second guard, reaching for his sidearm, found his hand frozen mid-motion, his eyes wide with a primal fear. He wasn't aware of what he was afraid of, only that something was profoundly wrong. Julian didn't attack. He didn't even seem to see the mercenaries. He simply adjusted the situation. He reached out, not with force, but with a delicate touch, and subtly rearranged the trajectory of the guard's movements. The baton clattered harmlessly against the floor. The gun remained stubbornly in the guard's hand, but the guard's vision was momentarily obscured by a sudden gust of wind, a manufactured distraction. The effect was immediate and utterly disorienting. The guards, reeling from the sudden shift in reality, scrambled to regain their bearings, their movements jerky and confused. Marcus, witnessing the unfolding spectacle, erupted in a torrent of furious accusations. What was that? Some kind of trick? Julian, his heart pounding, snapped his fingers. In the space of a heartbeat, the guards, utterly bewildered and disarmed, found themselves holding handfuls of dust, their weapons scattered around them as if by an unseen force. The effect was brief, fleeting, but devastating. Sophie, who had been watching with a calm, almost serene expression, simply picked up a fallen pocket watch, examining its intricate workings. "A most unusual mechanism," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "A curious resonance," as though the gears themselves were listening. She turned to Julian, her eyes holding a flicker of something beyond simple observation, a deep, unsettling recognition. "You are learning to hear the heartbeat of time, Jules. It is a powerful and dangerous gift." Chapter 3. The Echo of Stillness. The aftermath of the Jubilee was a meticulously crafted tableau of manufactured chaos and bewildered authority. Superintendent Graves, initially sputtering with rage and accusations of sabotage, was swiftly silenced by a battalion of Vane Executive Fleet Security, a silent, obsidian-clad force that radiated an unsettling efficiency. His attempts to rally the city guard were met with polite but firm resistance, punctuated by the chilling efficiency of Julian's corrections. Marcus, still nursing a bruised ego and a lingering sense of disorientation, found himself spending his days meticulously cleaning the shattered remnants of the support pillar, a task assigned by the newly appointed city engineer, a man who'd once been a mid-level foreman in the Vane Chronos Group's maintenance division. Julian, meanwhile, seemed to melt into the industrial landscape. He continued his work as a gear greaser, but now he moved with a quiet, almost predatory grace. The stuttering was gone, replaced by a deliberate, almost meditative calm. He observed, he listened, and he subtly, almost imperceptibly, manipulated the flow of events. The Vane fleet's presence was a constant low hum of technological scrutiny, their analysts and engineers tracking every fluctuation in the city's power grid, every shift in the flow of traffic, every twitch of a disgruntled worker. They were looking for anomalies, signs of temporal stillness, and Julian was its unwitting, exquisitely controlled expression. Sophie surprisingly seemed the most attuned to his actions. She had begun spending more time in the observation booth of the subway station, a small, soundproof space overlooking the hub. Initially, she simply continued her meticulous repairs, painstakingly reassembling broken movements with a surgeon's precision. But now, she would occasionally glance up at Julian, a thoughtful frown creasing her brow. "It's remarkable, isn't it, Jules?" she said one afternoon, her voice resonating with the quiet hum of the tunnel machinery. "The way you perceive. It's not sight, not truly beta resonance. You're not reacting to what is, but to what could be." Julian, wiping grease from his hands with a rag, paused. "You understand," he said, his voice still a touch hesitant. "It's difficult to explain. It's like hearing a note that isn't played, a shadow that moves before it's cast." "Time," she replied, her fingers deftly adjusting a tiny escapement wheel, "is a symphony of possibilities. And you, Jules, are learning to conduct it. She held up the pocket watch she'd been examining, the one head used during the Jubilee. This isn't just a timepiece. It's a key. A key to unlocking the potential within the rhythm. That evening, after completing his shift, Julian found himself drawn to Sophie's workshop. Dawdle had noticed a subtle shift in the air around her, a heightened awareness. As he entered, he found her meticulously cleaning a collection of antique chronometers, each meticulously inscribed with strange symbols. "I've been researching," she said, her voice low. "These aren't just clocks, Jules. They're resonators. Ancient instruments designed to amplify temporal awareness. They were created by the listeners, a sect of monks who believed they could glimpse the threads of time itself. They sought to master the echo of stillness, as they called it." She pointed to a particularly ornate chronometer, its face adorned with a miniature celestial map. "This one, in particular, is linked to a series of events that transpired centuries ago, during a period of immense temporal instability. It seems the Vane lineage has a connection to this history." Julian felt a prickle of unease. "Your father, he knew about this?" "I believe he did," Sophie said, her gaze piercing. "He was aware of the inherent risk, the potential for corruption, the destabilizing effect of manipulating time. But he also saw the potential for good. He sought to understand it, to control it, and, perhaps, to redirect it." Suddenly, the Vane fleet's technicians arrived, their presence a jarring intrusion into the quiet space. They were led by Mr. Harding, a young, impeccably dressed analyst who exuded an air of cold, clinical efficiency. "Mr. Vane, we've detected a residual temporal signature at this location," Harding announced, his voice devoid of emotion. "A faint echo of the overclocked state. We require you to undergo a full diagnostic assessment." Julian felt a surge of dread. He knew what they were after, not just him, but the potential he represented. He looked at Sophie, her eyes calm, yet filled with a knowing intensity. "It seems," she said quietly, "that the music is about to change." She picked up the brass pocket watch, turning it over in her hands. "Let's see how well you can conduct the chaos, Jules." And in that moment, Julian understood. It wasn't just about controlling time, it was about anticipating it. It was about becoming the echo itself. Chapter 4. The Echo of Chaos. The diagnostic assessment was a brutal, sterile exercise in unraveling Julian's carefully constructed lie. The Vane fleet's technicians, led by Harding, were unsettlingly precise, their movements economical, almost robotic. They deployed a network of chronosensors, shimmering, crystalline devices that pulsed with a disconcerting blue light around Sophie's workshop and the immediate vicinity. The sensors didn't simply measure temporal distortions, they seemed to probe them, drawing out echoes of the overclocked state like a mournful violin string. Julian endured the process with a grim resignation, a detached observer of his own dismantling. He answered Harding's relentless questions with carefully curated obfuscations, feeding them a narrative of experimental sensory deprivation and rigorous mental training, a palatable cover for the terrifying reality of temporal stillness. The sensors, however, were relentlessly accurate. They didn't detect the immediate aftermath of the Jubilee, the rearranged scene, the disarmed mercenaries. Instead, they focused on the potential, the residual energy signature of the overclocked state, dormant but undeniably present, clinging to the very foundations of the subway. As the assessment progressed, a low hum permeated the air, intensifying with each passing moment. Sophie, perched silently in a corner, began to subtly adjust the delicate mechanisms of her watches, a rhythmic clicking and whirring that seemed to counter the intrusive blue light of the sensors. She didn't speak, but Julian felt a strange, exhilarating pressure building within him, a sense of connection to something ancient, something powerful. Suddenly, Harding stopped mid-sentence, his face tightening. "Anomaly detected," he announced, his voice clipped and precise. "Level 3, temporal fluctuation, originating within the watchmaker." The technician surged forward, attempting to isolate Sophie, but she anticipated their move. With a swift, practiced motion, she flipped the brass pocket watch over, the worn gears spinning into view. Immediately, the blue light from the sensors flared violently, bathing the workshop in an oppressive glow. A dizzying wave of disorientation washed over Julian, a sensation of being pulled apart and reassembled at an accelerated rate. But this time, it wasn't the controlled overclock state. This was something wilder, more chaotic. The world shimmered, warped, and distorted. He saw, for a fleeting, terrifying moment, not just the present, but fragments of the past, flashes of armored figures engaged in impossible combat, gears grinding in a forgotten era, a woman with silver hair and eyes like polished jade, wielding a weapon that defied the laws of physics. He staggered, clutching at his head, the sensation receding as abruptly as it had begun. The technicians were frozen, their instruments flickering erratically. Harding stared at Sophie, his face a mask of horrified fascination. "Impossible," he stammered. "The signature, it's exponentially stronger. It's not just temporal stillness. It's a resonance." Sophie, her face serene, held up the brass watch. "My dear Jules," she said, her voice laced with a newfound urgency, "you've been hiding more than just a greasy face. You've been hiding a symphony." Julian understood. The Vane lineage wasn't just about controlling time, it was about attuning to it, about recognizing and amplifying temporal echoes. His father hadn't simply sought to understand temporal stillness, had been trying to awaken a dormant potential, a connection to a deeper, more primordial force. The events of centuries ago, Julian realized, they weren't random. They were orchestrations. The Vanes weren't just wielding temporal stillness, they were conducting the flow of time itself. As if in confirmation, the floor beneath them began to tremble. The rhythmic grinding of the subway ceased, replaced by a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through their bones. The crystal pendants worn by the fleet technicians pulsed with an unnatural light. Suddenly, a holographic projection flickered to life, displaying a sequence of events spanning centuries, the Vanes battling shadowy figures, wielding weapons that resembled distorted gears, manipulating timelines to avert catastrophic events, planting subtle interventions within the fabric of reality. It culminated in a single chilling image: a young Julian Vane, no older than 10, standing before a council of ancient temporal masters, his eyes burning with an unnatural light. "This isn't just about resetting fate," Harding said, his voice strained. "It's about preserving it. The Vanes aren't simply manipulating time, they're correcting deviations, ensuring the timeline remains stable." He turned to Julian, his eyes narrowed. "You are a vital component of that correction, Mr. Vane. And we need to understand, why have you been concealing your abilities for so long?" Before Julian could answer, the walls of the workshop began to shift and distort, the air thickening with a palpable energy. He felt a profound connection to the machinery surrounding him, the gears, the pistons, the very heartbeat of the city. Sophie, her gaze fixed on the brass watch, whispered, "Let's see how well you can conduct the chaos, Jules." And in that moment, Julian knew. The reckoning wasn't just for his actions, it was for the fate of time itself. Chapter 5. Echoes of the Iron Dragon. The briefing room felt less like a strategic command center, and more like a captured forge. The air thrummed with a barely contained energy, intensified by the crystalline pendants worn by the Vane executive fleet technicians, shimmering, hexagonal shapes that pulsed with a deep, resonant hum, identical to the one that had initially disoriented Julian. Harding, a man who'd spent his career meticulously charting timelines, now looked genuinely unnerved, his usual composure replaced with a tight-lipped anxiety. "The anomalies are escalating, Mr. Vane," he stated, his voice clipped. "Since your intervention at the Jubilee, we've detected a significant increase in temporal distortions within a 50-kilometer radius. Small shifts at first, a misplaced tool, a forgotten conversation, but now they're manifesting as localized temporal loops, miniature pockets of repeating events. He gestured towards a holographic projection dominating the room, displaying a chaotic swirl of light and data. We've traced the epicenter to this city, specifically to this industrial hub. It's as if someone, or something, is actively trying to unravel the carefully woven tapestry of time. Julian, meticulously examining a disassembled clockwork automaton, a morbid fascination he couldn't quite suppress, remained silent, absorbing the information. The revelation about the Vane lineage, the centuries of correcting timelines, felt profoundly unsettling. It wasn't simply about manipulating time, it was about a sacred duty, a burden carried across generations. Suddenly, a low growl resonated from the walls, a mechanical rasp overlaid with a subtly shifting temporal cadence. The holographic projection fractured, replaced by an image that sent a shiver down Julian's spine, a stylized dragon, crafted entirely from interlocking gears and polished steel, its eyes glowing with an eerie turquoise light. "This isn't just a projection, Dr. Chen," the fleet's chief temporal analyst announced, her voice strained. "It's an echo, an imprint left by a temporal combatant, a highly advanced practitioner of what we've classified as Iron Dragon, a lost martial art of ancient China, designed to manipulate time through kinetic energy and the resonance of machinery." Harding stepped forward, his face grim. Iron Dragon practitioners didn't simply stop time. They exploited its inherent vibrational frequencies. They could accelerate their own reactions to an impossible degree, create localized distortions, and even rewrite events on a small scale by disrupting the natural flow of temporal energy. It's unbelievably precise, incredibly dangerous. He turned to Julian, his expression demanding. "And you, Mr. Vane, possess a dormant potential for Iron Dragon. The Vane lineage isn't merely about temporal manipulation, it's rooted in this ancient art. It's why your temporal stillness feels different. It's not just a neurological trick. It's tapping into something far older, far more primal." As Harding spoke, the room seemed to shift again, the sterile metallic surfaces blurring at the edges. Julian instinctively reached for the broken brass pocket watch in his pocket, the familiar weight grounding him. He felt a surge of energy, a resonant vibration that mirrored the growl emanating from the walls. "It's amplifying," Sophie said, her voice surprisingly calm. "It's trying to connect." She held up her own brass watch, its intricate gears spinning with an almost unsettling speed. "The rhythm is changing, Jules. Not just yours, but everything." Suddenly, Julian's vision intensified, blurring into a kaleidoscope of motion. He felt a rush of data, the intricate workings of the city's machinery, the flow of energy through its veins, the subtle vibrations of the very earth. He wasn't just seeing, he was feeling the timeline, a torrent of potential realities swirling around him. Then, without conscious effort, his hands began to move, not as Julian Vane, heir to a global empire, but as something else entirely. He moved with a grace that defied his clumsy exterior, his movements precise and fluid, like a dancer sculpted from steel. The gears of the workshop seemed to respond to his will, accelerating, slowing, shifting their positions, as if choreographed by an unseen hand. He moved through the room, not walking, but flowing, creating momentary pockets of temporal distortion. A wrench suspended in mid-air for a fraction of a second, a spilled oil slick momentarily frozen in place, a flickering light bulb momentarily dimmed. Marcus, frozen mid-taunt, his face contorted in a sneer, became a statue of frustrated aggression. The holographic projection of the Iron Dragon shifted, the stylized dragon expanding to fill the room, its turquoise eyes focused solely on Julian. "You're responding to the resonance," Harding shouted, his voice laced with awe and fear. "The Iron Dragon is attempting to claim you." Julian, fighting against the overwhelming influx of temporal energy, snapped his fingers. The mercenaries, still frozen in their attempts to apprehend him, were instantly dispersed into a dozen swirling vortices of dust and shattered glass. Marcus, momentarily suspended in a time loop, found himself repeating his mocking jeers endlessly before collapsing into a stunned, silent heap. As the chaos subsided, the room returned to normal. The holographic projection vanished, and the resonant hum faded. Julian collapsed to his knees, exhausted, the broken pocket watch slipping from his grasp. Sophie knelt beside him, her hand gently touching his arm. "The rhythm is strong within you, Jules," she whispered. "You must learn to conduct it, not be consumed by it." She pointed to the watch in his hand. "Let's see how well you can conduct the chaos." Chapter 6. The gears within the city, still reeling from the Jubilee's near catastrophe, was swarming with investigators, reporters, and a disconcerting number of men in dark suits who smelled faintly of sandalwood and power. Julian, effectively a gilded prisoner within the newly acquired city hall, found himself a reluctant focal point, a bizarre anomaly in the wake of a manufactured disaster. His father, Silas Vane, the CEO of the Chronos Group, was a study in polished disdain, observing Julian with an expression that suggested he'd rather be dissecting a black hole than dealing with his son's peculiar methods. "This spectacle," Silas said, his voice a carefully modulated baritone, "is proving remarkably useful, Julian. The media is devouring this story. Heir saves city with temporal anomalies. It's quite the narrative." He gestured to Harding, a sharp, data-obsessed analyst who'd been shadowing Julian since the initial revelation. "Harding, relay the revised projection to the PR team. Emphasize the efficiency, the precision, the unexpected application of advanced chronometric technology." Julian ignored him, his gaze fixed on Sophie, who was seated quietly in a corner, meticulously examining the fractured face of a grandfather clock. Had brought her in, of course, not out of sentiment, but because she was the key. The Iron Dragon's resonance wasn't simply a random burst of temporal energy, it was a carefully calibrated attempt to latch onto a conduit, a vessel. And the rhythm she heard, the inherent connection to time she possessed, was that vessel. "You're not listening, Julian," Silas snapped, his patience fraying. "We've invested billions in this acquisition. We need to leverage this. Understand?" Julian finally met his father's gaze. "Leverage what, father? A shattered city? A manipulated tragedy? You think control comes from destruction?" Suddenly, the room shifted. Not in a jarring, chaotic way like before, but with a subtle, almost imperceptible distortion. The holographic projection of the Iron Dragon, which Harding had been meticulously monitoring, flared brighter. The turquoise eyes now seemed to bore directly into Julian's soul. "The resonance is escalating," Harding shouted, clutching his head. "It's attempting a full integration. Julian, you need to suppress it. Now." Julian understood. The Iron Dragon wasn't just seeking to use him, it wanted to be him. It recognized the immense power within, the potential for manipulating time itself. He could feel the pressure building, a roaring torrent threatening to overwhelm his control. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the broken brass pocket watch, the one he'd used to save Sophie. This time, however, he didn't initiate the overclock state. Instead, he held it aloft, rotating it slowly, his fingers tracing the worn engravings. As he did, the room began to subtly shimmer. The air thickened, and the rhythmic hum of the city, the distant rumble of traffic, the whirring of machinery, the muffled chatter all seemed to slow, stretching out into an unnerving, prolonged sequence. "You're not fighting it, Julian," Sophie said, her voice remarkably calm amidst the escalating chaos. "You're responding to it. The dragon isn't trying to take you, it's trying to show you." He looked at her, his eyes widening with understanding. "It's teaching me," he whispered. "It's showing me how to shape the flow, not just stop it." With deliberate precision, he focused on the watch. He wasn't pushing against the resonance, but rather, he was weaving himself into its fabric. He visualized the gears of the city, not as static, unyielding components, but as interconnected pathways of temporal energy. He felt the flow, the subtle currents of time itself, and began to gently, almost instinctively, redirect it. Around him, the effects became pronounced. The flickering light bulbs stabilized, bathing the room in a steady, unwavering glow. The hum of the machinery softened into a harmonious drone. Harding, momentarily frozen in a horrified tableau of panic, found himself regaining his composure, a look of bewildered wonder replacing his fear. But the Iron Dragon wasn't retreating. It pulsed with renewed intensity, its holographic projection growing larger, more defined. The turquoise eyes narrowed, and a low, resonant growl filled the room, not a sound, but a vibration that resonated deep within Julian's bones. "It's pushing back!" Harding screamed. "The integration is complete. Julian, you have to sever the connection." Julian closed his eyes, channeling all his focus, all his will. He didn't fight the dragon. He harmonized with it. He realized that the Iron Dragon wasn't inherently malevolent. It was a guardian, a protector of temporal stability, one that had grown wary of humanity's reckless manipulation of time. With a final decisive movement, he snapped his fingers. But this time, it wasn't an abrupt cessation of time. It was a shift. The room dissolved into a swirling vortex of color and light, the holographic projection becoming an intricate, three-dimensional representation of the city's infrastructure, pulsating with the energy of countless temporal streams. When the light subsided, Julian stood in the center of the vortex, the broken pocket watch radiating a soft, turquoise glow. He looked at Sophie, a genuine smile gracing his features for the first time. "You were right," he said. "It's not about stopping time. It's about understanding its rhythm." He looked down at the watch, and, for the first time, he felt truly in control, not just of his powers, but of the very fabric of time itself. He had not merely reset the fate of his rivals, had begun to understand the fundamental laws governing existence. And he knew with a chilling certainty that his journey had just begun. Chapter 7: Echoes of the Jade Dragon. The aftermath of the Jubilee was a carefully constructed chaos, orchestrated by Julian with the precision of a master clockmaker. The immediate damage was contained, the mercenaries subdued, and Superintendent Graves and Marcus, reduced to sputtering, humiliated figures, were indeed dispatched to the clock towers. Their task meticulously marking each hour, each minute, their movements dictated by a complex series of gongs and chimes, was a strangely fitting punishment, a constant, grating reminder of their greed. However, the real transformation wasn't in the public spectacle, it was within Julian himself. The integration with the dragon had irrevocably changed him. The initial, violent surge of power had left him exhausted, a raw, pulsing ache in his bones. Now, a quiet resonance lingered, a subtle hum beneath his skin. He could feel the flow of time, not as a linear progression, but as an interwoven tapestry of possibilities, each thread vibrating with potential. Sophie's restoration was a marvel of modern medicine, spearheaded by Dr. Ito, a Japanese surgeon who had previously dismissed Julian as a delusional anomaly. But the evidence, presented with meticulous data, showcasing the impossible speeds and the subtly manipulated temporal distortions, was undeniable. Sophie's sight returned slowly, initially as fragmented impressions, the shimmer of dust motes dancing in the afternoon light, the faint distortion of the stained glass windows of the subway station. Then, gradually, the world solidified, becoming sharp and vibrant, overwhelming in its beauty. It's like hearing the silence," she whispered, her fingers tracing the intricate brass workings of a restored celestial clock. A gift from Julian, but louder, so much louder. Julian, now deeply invested in understanding the dragon's purpose and his own burgeoning abilities, began spending hours in the grand observatory, a cathedral of shimmering crystal and intricate clockwork. He wasn't simply observing the stars, he was listening to them. Using temporal stillness, He slowed time to a crawl, dissecting the movements of planets, measuring the subtle fluctuations in their gravitational fields. The broken pocket watch, now radiating a constant turquoise light, served as a focal point, a conduit for his power. One evening, while analyzing the orbital patterns of Jupiter, he felt a disturbance, a discordant note in the otherwise harmonious rhythm. It wasn't an immediate threat, but a persistent ripple, growing stronger with each passing cycle. He focused, channeling the dragon's energy, and the vortex returned, swirling with exponentially more intensity. This time, however, it wasn't a static representation of the city. It was a living, breathing echo of a past event, the construction of the Grand Jubilee itself. He saw, superimposed upon the present reality, the moment of the explosion, not as a chaotic, destructive event, but as a tightly wound spring being released. He saw Marcus, not as a menacing figure, but a desperate, frantic attempt to undo a mistake. A moment of catastrophic misjudgment amplified by temporal distortion. But the true revelation was the presence of another entity within the vortex, a shimmering, vaguely humanoid form composed entirely of chronal energy. It resembled a dragon, but older, far more ancient, etched with the weariness of countless ages. This wasn't the Iron Dragon, this was the Jade Dragon. It's a guardian, Julian realized, his voice a low murmur. The Iron Dragon attempted to contain this one, to shield humanity from itself. But it was a futile effort. It's simply waiting. As he spoke, the Jade Dragon shifted, its form coalescing, focusing its attention on him. It projected a single, chilling thought: you are not a shield. You are a wound. Suddenly, Harding, monitoring the observatory from a secure satellite link, screamed, "Julian, temporal interference. The dragon is amplifying your connection. It's feeding on your power." Julian staggered, clutching his head. The turquoise glow of the watch intensified, almost blinding. He felt the Iron Dragon within him battling against the Jade Dragon, a desperate struggle for control. He realized with sickening clarity that he wasn't merely manipulating time, he was drawing it in, becoming a conduit for immense, unstable energy. "Sever the connection," Harding yelled, his voice laced with panic. "You're going to unravel the fabric of reality." Julian closed his eyes, struggling to regain control. He couldn't simply sever the connection that would destroy the dragon, potentially unleashing unimaginable chaos. Instead, he shifted his approach, not fighting the dragon, but attempting to understand its purpose, to harmonize with its ancient, weary vigilance. He reached out with his mind, not with force, but with empathy, projecting an image of the broken pocket watch, the image of the chaotic Jubilee, the image of Sophie, her newly restored sight, her quiet joy. "I don't want to control time," he murmured, his voice strained. "I only want to preserve it." The vortex stabilized, the Jade Dragon calmed, and the overwhelming pressure subsided. The turquoise glow of the watch dimmed, returning to its soft, gentle pulse. Julian opened his eyes, a profound weariness in their depths. "The Jade Dragon, it doesn't want to protect time," he whispered. "It wants to remember it." He looked at Sophie, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "It's not about stopping time," he said. "It's about accepting its inevitable march and learning from the echoes of what was and what might be." The journey, he realized, was far from over. It had only just begun to resonate with the whispers of eternity. Chapter 8: Gears of Remembrance. The Grand Observatory, a testament to Julian's swift and unsettling acquisition, rose from the heart of the revamped transport hub, like a crystallized dream. Its polished brass gears spun silently, reflecting the city's reborn energy, while vast panes of crystal offered a breathtaking panorama of the star-dusted sky, a sight Sophie hadn't experienced in decades. The initial awe, however, began to subtly shift, replaced by a deep, unsettling awareness. Julian, now spending his days overseeing the city's infrastructure improvements, a curiously benevolent dictator, found himself increasingly drawn to Sophie's quiet contemplation. He'd spend hours with her, not lecturing or explaining temporal stillness, but simply listening to her observations about the stars, the subtle shifts in celestial patterns, and the way the city's clockwork heart seemed to beat in response to the cosmos. "It's not just measuring time, Julian," she said one evening, her voice a low, melodic hum. "It's feeling its weight. Each tick, each tock is a memory, a potential future. The gears don't just turn, they remember." This statement resonated deeply with Julian's burgeoning understanding of the Jade Dragon. He realized Harding's initial fear hadn't been about chaos, but about a fundamental misunderstanding of the dragon's purpose. It wasn't a weapon of control, but a reservoir of temporal echoes, a guardian of potential timelines, meticulously cataloging the past to guide the present and warn of possible futures. The problem wasn't the dragon's existence, it was the interference. Julian's attempts to directly manipulate time, even with the purest of intentions saving Sophie, resetting the Jubilee, had created ripples, fractures in the meticulously woven tapestry of time. The dragon, reacting to this disruption, had become increasingly agitated, manifesting as unpredictable surges of turquoise energy, capable of subtly warping reality. "I need to understand the dragon's catalog," Julian said, his voice tight with concentration as he meticulously adjusted a complex array of chronometers in the observatory's central chamber. "It's not about stopping time. It's about accessing the data, the memories it holds." Sophie, having grown accustomed to his sudden shifts in focus, simply nodded, her gaze fixed on the rotating gears. "The key, I believe, is resonance. The dragon doesn't respond to force, but to understanding. You must show it not your will, but your respect for its burden." That evening, as the first snow of the season began to fall, Julian initiated a new approach. He didn't attempt to manipulate time, he simply listened. He sat with the dragon, a swirling vortex of turquoise energy contained within a reinforced chamber crafted from the salvaged gears of the Jubilee support pillar, and projected an image, not the chaotic explosion, not the desperate rescue of Sophie, but the simple act of a clockmaker meticulously cleaning a single worn cog. He focused on the rhythmic precision, the quiet dedication, the inherent beauty of the act of preservation. He poured his own memories into the projection, his childhood, his strained relationship with his father, his sudden, isolating plunge into the world of temporal stillness. He didn't try to explain his intentions, only to offer a glimpse of his own existence, his own struggle to understand the burden of time. For a long, agonizing moment, the dragon remained static, a silent, swirling storm. Then, a single, pure note resonated from the vortex, a sound that seemed to vibrate within Julian's very bones. The turquoise glow intensified, coalescing into a shimmering projection, not of a single event, but of a vast, intricate network of timelines, each shimmering with potential and consequence. He saw moments from his own life, fragmented and overlapping, viewed through the lens of countless possibilities. He witnessed the disastrous fates of rival Chronos groups, the rise and fall of forgotten empires, and the delicate dance of cause and effect that shaped the universe. It was a torrent of information, overwhelming in its scope, but within it, he sensed a profound sadness, a weariness born of witnessing the endless procession of time. Suddenly, a sharp, piercing pain lanced through Julian's head. He cried out, clutching at his temples, as the dragon's projection shifted, focusing on a single, haunting image: Marcus, standing amidst the rubble of the Jubilee, his face twisted in a hateful sneer. "It's not just remembering the past, it's remembering threats," Sophie whispered, her voice filled with a chilling realization. The dragon doesn't just store time, it anticipates danger. And it seems Marcus, he's a constant in its awareness. As the projection faded, the dragon's turquoise glow dimmed, returning to its gentle pulse. Julian, drained and disoriented, collapsed to his knees, understanding dawning in his eyes. He hadn't simply unlocked a temporal archive, had unearthed a primal, instinctive defense, a vigilant guardian woven into the very fabric of time. The reckoning hadn't just begun. It had been orchestrated by the echoes of a forgotten memory. Chapter 9. The Jade Serpents, warning. The metallic tang of soot clung to Julian's clothes, a grim reminder of the controlled chaos had unleashed. The immediate aftermath of the Jubilee explosion was a whirlwind of official pronouncements, bewildered engineers, and the bewildered gratitude of a city that had almost been swallowed whole. His father, Alistair Vane, a man sculpted from ice and decades of calculated ruthlessness, was meticulously assessing the damage, his presence radiating an almost palpable disapproval of Julian's unorthodox methods. "Interesting, Julian," Alistair said, his voice a low, precise rumble, as he examined the meticulously disassembled mercenaries. "A crude application of temporal distortion. You've demonstrated a capacity for direct intervention I hadn't anticipated. Perhaps with a more disciplined approach, you could have subtly influenced events before they transpired." Julian ignored the veiled criticism, focusing instead on the tremors running beneath the city's surface, the subtle shifts in the flow of time that accompanied his overclock state. He was acutely aware of the dragon's constant, silent monitoring, a feeling akin to being watched by a million eyes, each focused on a single critical point. Sophie, now the recipient of a team of surgeons, a testament to Julian's effortless wealth, sat in the observatory head built for her, her face still delicate and serene. The crystal dome pulsed with the faint hypnotic rhythm of the dragon, reflecting a miniature cosmos within. The initial surgery had been a success. A thin, surgically implanted device nestled behind her eyes was delicately stimulating the optic nerves. She could still only perceive shades of gray, but the world was beginning to resolve itself, the outlines of objects slowly sharpening into focus. "It's remarkable," she murmured, her voice thick with wonder as she tentatively traced a finger along the intricate brass gears of a celestial clock. "Like hearing the universe speak in a language I never knew existed." Suddenly, the dragon's projection flared again, this time far more intense and disturbing than before. It wasn't just Marcus, it was a cascade of images, a fractured tapestry of potential futures. Julian saw himself, not in the gleaming halls of the Vane Chronos Group, but chained to a colossal, jade-colored clock tower, a prisoner of the ancient martial art he was now mastering. He witnessed himself, older, worn, his movements slow and deliberate, a lone warrior battling a relentless tide of temporal anomalies, his eyes burning with a desperate, mournful intensity. Then he saw him, a figure shrouded in swirling mist, impossibly ancient, radiating an aura of profound power and terrible sorrow. He wore armor fashioned from jade and bronze, etched with serpentine symbols. He moved with a fluid, predatory grace, wielding a weapon that resembled a coiled dragon, its scales shimmering with an unnatural luminescence. The air around this figure crackled with suppressed energy, a palpable threat. "The Jade Serpent," Sophie whispered, her voice barely audible. The legends, they were true. Julian felt a surge of disorientation, a profound sense of dread. Alistair, witnessing the escalation of the dragon's projection, stepped forward, his face a mask of cold calculation. "Control it, Julian. You are losing yourself." But Julian couldn't control it. The Jade Serpent was actively engaging with him, probing his thoughts, assessing his weaknesses. The projection shifted, focusing on a single crucial detail, a small, intricately carved jade pendant hanging around the neck of the Jade Serpent, a pendant that bore an uncanny resemblance to the pocket watch head used to activate the overclock state. The pendant, Julian gasped, instinctively reaching for his chest. He felt a pressure, a subtle disruption within his own temporal field. The dragon was attempting to replicate his power, to build a counterforce. "This isn't just a temporal archive, is it?" Julian realized, a chilling understanding gripping him. It's a weapon. And Marcus, he's not just a constant threat. As a key, the Jade Serpent's image solidified, its eyes burning with an ancient, unnerving intelligence. It raised a hand, and a shimmering wave of temporal energy pulsed outwards, striking Julian with brutal force. He staggered back, clutching his head, feeling the familiar pain of the overclocked state building within him. But this time, it was laced with something far more sinister, a deliberate, targeted assault on his own temporal core. "He's feeding off my power," Julian yelled, struggling to maintain control. The dragon isn't just watching, it's consuming. Sophie, using her newfound ability to perceive even the faintest shifts in light, detected a subtle distortion in the air, a visual echo of the Jade Serpent's attack. She grabbed a small, intricately crafted brass gear from her workbench, a gear shed painstakingly crafted for Julian months ago. As she held it aloft, she murmured a single, ancient phrase in archaic Mandarin, a phrase Shed learned from Julian, a phrase that resonated with the rhythmic heartbeat of the universe. Suddenly, the Jade Serpent's projection flickered, momentarily disrupted. The turquoise glow of the dragon dimmed further, and a palpable sense of disorientation washed over Julian. The attack subsided, leaving him breathless and weakened, but alive. You countered him," Julian said, his voice laced with astonishment. Sophie simply nodded, her gray eyes fixed on the brass gear, the faintest glimmer of color returning to them. "The universe rarely yields its secrets without a price," she said, her voice filled with a wisdom that transcended time itself. "And sometimes, the smallest gear can be the most powerful weapon." Chapter 10. Resonance. The lingering effects of the Jade Serpent's assault clung to Julian like the greasy residue of the transit hub. "I wonder why His head throbbed with a dull, insistent ache, a phantom echo of the temporal fracturing head experienced. He spent the better part of the day in Sophie's workshop, meticulously examining the brass gear shed, used a perfect miniature of a cog from one of the massive transit pumps. It wasn't just beautifully crafted, it seemed to pulse with a faint internal warmth. "It's more than just metal, isn't it?" Julian asked, turning the gear over in his hands. "It's resonance. You channeled something through it, something tied to the flow of time itself." Sophie, seated at her workbench meticulously adjusting a tiny escapement, simply replied, "The universe speaks in rhythms, Julian. Those who learn to listen can shape them." She continued her work, her focus entirely absorbed in the intricate dance of gears and springs. The air in the workshop thickened with the scent of oil, brass polish, and something subtly floral, a calming fragrance she used to ground herself when manipulating temporal energies. News of the Jubilee explosion had spread like wildfire, attracting attention from the highest echelons of the city's intelligence apparatus. Captain Davies, a stern, pragmatic officer from the Chronos Security Division, a department ostensibly dedicated to monitoring time anomalies, but in reality heavily influenced by the Vane Group's own operations, arrived with a squad of heavily armed men. Davies, a man of rigid protocol and unwavering loyalty to his employer, regarded Julian with undisguised suspicion. "Vane, I presume?" Davies' voice was a clipped baritone. "We've been observing your unconventional activities. The disruption at the Jubilee was significant. We need to understand how you managed to, shall we say, influence the sequence of events." Julian remained impassive, carefully modulating his stutter. "I simply reacted. It was a chaotic situation, a matter of mitigating damage." "Mitigating damage by appearing to defy the very laws of time?" Davies countered, gesturing to the forensic team meticulously collecting evidence, mostly dust and bewildered mercenaries. "Don't insult my intelligence. The Vane Chronos Group has been monitoring temporal fluctuations for decades. You're not the first to wield this gift." Before Davies could press further, a tremor ran through the workshop. Not an earthquake, but a subtle shifting of the air, a momentary dilation of space. Julian instinctively reached out, engaging the overclock state, but this time, it wasn't a conscious act. It was a reflexive response, a desperate attempt to anchor himself against the encroaching temporal intrusion. The world dissolved into a gray monochrome, the relentless ticking of the workshop's clocks fading into a distant drone. He saw the forensic team frozen mid-action, Davy's hand reaching out to grab him, all rendered as ghostly echoes suspended in a timeless void. He wasn't fighting, not exactly. He was resonating, attempting to match the chaotic frequency of the attack, to understand its source. And then, he saw him. Not a projection, not an illusion, but a palpable presence. A serpent of turquoise energy, coiled and pulsing with malevolent intent. It wasn't the jade serpent had encountered before. This entity was far larger, far more complex, radiating not just temporal distortion, but an age-old, primal hunger. This was a dragon, a being of immense temporal power, and it wasn't merely observing, it was actively attempting to unravel his core. Just as the dragon's energy began to overwhelm him, completely subsuming his own temporal control, Sophie reacted. She didn't shout, didn't attempt to physically intervene. Instead, she raised her hand, clutching the miniature brass gear. As she did, she repeated the archaic phrase, Shu Yi Zhong Xin, a phrase that vibrated with the deep resonance of the universe's rhythmic heartbeat. This time, however, something was different. The air shimmered, not just around the gear, but around Sophie herself. A visible wave of turquoise energy slammed into the dragon, forcing it back with palpable force. The gray monochrome fragmented, shattering into 1,000 iridescent shards. The dragon recoiled, momentarily stunned, its form flickering violently. Julian felt a surge of power, not from himself, but from Sophie, a conduit for ancient temporal energies, a shield woven from the very fabric of time. The attack subsided, leaving him drained but intact. You wielded the dragon's own power against it, Julian gasped, his body trembling with the exertion. It's a counter-resonance. You're a key. Sophie's gray eyes, usually clouded with a gentle wisdom, now burned with an intensity he hadn't seen before. Time is not a river to be controlled, Julian, she said, her voice now resonant with an age-old authority. It is a tapestry, and some threads are meant to be woven, not severed. She held up the brass gear. The faint glimmer of color within them intensified. The smallest gear can indeed be the most powerful weapon, when wielded by one who understands its song. Chapter 11. The Weavers, not the aftermath of the Grand Jubilee, hung thick with a strange, unsettling stillness. The immediate chaos had subsided. The emergency services were a whirlwind of controlled efficiency, and the city, usually a symphony of stressed metal and hurried footsteps, felt muted. It was a silence born not of peace, but of a profound, unsettling alteration. Julian, leaning against a salvage support beam, felt a persistent thrumming in his bones, a lingering echo of Sophie's power. His head pounded, a side effect of the channeled resonance, but he pushed through it, focusing on the extraordinary. He and Sophie had, in a fleeting, terrifying moment, not just deflected the dragon's attack, they'd weaponized it. The dragon, he said cautiously, isn't a guardian of time. It's a force, a primal echo of temporal currents. You've been absorbing and manipulating it, unconsciously, for years. Sophie remained motionless, her hand still cradling the brass gear. A fine mist of silver dust seemed to emanate from it, swirling around her like miniature galaxies. The Clockmakers Guild, she began, her voice a low hum, has a lineage. Centuries ago we weren't just keepers of time but listeners. We learned to feel the pulse of existence, to harmonize with the flow. The dragon's essence is a fragment of that, a concentrated burst of temporal energy left behind by a cataclysmic event, a test of potential, a weapon meant to be contained. Marcus and Superintendent Graves, predictably, were not cooperating. They were being held in a converted subway maintenance tunnel, subjected to grueling physical exercises designed to re-establish their connection to the rhythms of the city. Julian, under the guise of observing their progress, subtly monitored their movements, detecting the faint, obsessive attempts to rediscover their lost power. He realized, with a chilling certainty, that Graves wasn't simply a corrupt official, he was a corrupted vessel, a cracked conduit for a force he couldn't control. As they worked, assisting the city's engineers in repairing the damage, Julian began to study Sophie more intently. He noticed details had previously missed: the almost imperceptible tremor in her hands as she worked, the way her eyes flickered with an awareness that transcended the physical world, the faint scent of ozone that clung to her clothes. "You said you've been listening to the gears," Julian prompted, carefully avoiding direct questions about the dragon. "For how long?" "Since I was a child," she replied, her voice quiet. "My grandfather taught me. He said the gears hold echoes of moments past, whispers of futures yet to be. But he always stressed the importance of balance. That too much focus on a single moment can disrupt the flow, create distortions." Suddenly, the air grew colder. The shimmer around Sophie intensified, and the brass gear in her hand pulsed with a brilliant turquoise light, throwing dancing shadows across the tunnel walls. A low, guttural groan echoed through the space, a mechanical resonance, yet not entirely mechanical. The dragon is stirring, Julian realized, adrenaline surging through him. This wasn't a simple deflection, it was an awakening. The sheer force of Sophie's ability, amplified by the lingering energy of the attack, had created a feedback loop, pulling at the dragon's essence, drawing it out. He instinctively activated the overclock state, his vision blurring, the world slowing to a crawl. But this time, it was different. The gray didn't just dampen the surroundings, it consumed them, drawing the dragon's power in, feeding it into the intensifying vortex around Sophie. He realized then that the key wasn't to resist the dragon, but to guide it, to shape its flow, to weave it into something useful. "Sophie!" he shouted, his voice barely audible above the intensifying hum. "Focus! Don't fight it. Channel it." Imagine the rhythm, the flow. Sophie closed her eyes, her entire body swaying gently, as if conducting a silent symphony. The brass gear in her hand began to spin faster, emitting a blinding beam of turquoise energy that struck directly at the heart of the dragon's manifestation, a swirling, unstable knot of temporal energy forming in the center of the tunnel. With a final, agonizing groan, the knot collapsed, dissipating into a shower of silver sparks. The air stilled. The shimmering ceased. Sophie slumped slightly, her breathing shallow, but her eyes, now burning with a knowing intensity, remained fixed on the brass gear. "The weaver's knot," she whispered, her voice filled with awe and a profound understanding. "It's not about controlling time, Julian. It's about understanding its structure. It's about knowing how to weave the threads to mend the breaks, to guide the flow." She held up the gear, now radiating a subtle warmth. "You were not meant to be a soldier of time, Julian Vane. You were meant to be a weaver." Chapter 12. Echoes of the Weaver. The air in the Grand Observatory, a breathtaking testament to Julian's sudden, overwhelming acquisition, still shimmered faintly with residual temporal energy. Sunlight, filtered through a massive rotating brass dome etched with constellations, painted the crystal floors in shifting patterns. Sophie stood before the central console, a complex arrangement of finely crafted gears and pendulums. Humming with barely contained power, her eyes now a startling, almost unnerving shade of sapphire. The sight was unnerving, but not unpleasant. It was as if she held the night sky within her gaze. Julian, clad in a simple dark blue tunic, had chosen himself a far cry from the tailored suits of the Vane Chronos Group, watched her, a profound sense of humility settling over him. The weight of his family's legacy, the countless billions under his control, felt insignificant compared to the quiet, instinctive knowledge radiating from her. "The readings are extraordinary," Sophie said, her voice still retaining a slight tremor, a reminder of the near-fatal strain she had endured. The temporal currents within this space are incredibly dense. It's as if this building itself remembers. It does, Julian confirmed, activating a series of holographic projections that depicted the observatory's construction, layered over a fluctuating map of temporal distortions. This location, this building, was chosen centuries ago by a group of artisans. They didn't build with stone and steel, they built with time itself. They sought to create a nexus point, a place where the fabric of time could be manipulated. Marcus Graves, predictably, was present, a sneering, humiliated figure restrained by a squad of heavily armed security personnel. He was now confined to a small, windowless chamber built within the observatory's foundations, a grim parody of a timekeeping device, a massive pendulum suspended from the ceiling, forced to swing relentlessly, an agonizing reminder of his enforced servitude. So the little clock greaser becomes an architect of time? Marcus spat, his voice echoing through the chamber. You think you can simply buy your way into something you don't understand? Julian ignored him, focusing his attention on Sophie. You described it as a weaver's knot, a way to understand the structure of time. But it's more than that. It's about resonance, about finding the harmonic frequency of a temporal anomaly. He reached out, placing a hand lightly on the brass gear in her grasp. The overclock state, it wasn't just about stopping time. It was about tapping into this frequency, about translating that dissonance into something manageable. He paused, studying her intently. You saw the dragon, Sophie. It wasn't a destructive force, but a chaotic, untamed echo of that original resonance. You channeled it. You guided it. Suddenly, the observatory shuddered. The rotating dome slowed, then abruptly stopped, throwing the holographic projections into momentary chaos. The rhythmic hum of the control consoles intensified, vibrating through the crystal floor. What's happening? Sophie cried, her hand tightening around the gear. The frequency. It's shifting. Julian's eyes narrowed, recognizing the signs instantly. The weaver's knot is reacting to something. A new anomaly. And it's drawing power from the collapse. He gestured toward the shattered remains of the support pillar in the subway tunnels, now stabilized by a network of temporal anchors. The event itself created a ripple, a scar in the timeline. And it's trying to heal itself. He began to move, his movements fluid and precise, a subtle shift in posture that signaled the activation of temporal stillness. The world around them blurred, the colors deepening, the sounds fading into a muted drone. But this time, it wasn't the dull gray of a frozen moment. This time, the gray was laced with threads of crimson, pulsing with raw, untamed power. It's feeding on the grief, the chaos, Sophie said, her voice barely audible above the rising crescendo of the anomaly. The echoes of the fallen. Julian moved with terrifying speed, dodging falling debris not by stopping time, but by subtly altering his perception of time, experiencing fractions of a second in slow motion while the world around him remained in its normal pace. He moved toward the shattered pillar, extending a hand towards the pulsating crimson thread. Don't fight it, Sophie, he shouted, his voice a sharp, focused warning. Don't try to contain it. Weave. Sophie, her eyes burning with a sapphire intensity, mirrored his actions. She reached out, her fingers tracing the spiraling crimson thread, her body swaying in a perfectly orchestrated dance. The brass gear in her hand began to spin with unimaginable speed, emitting a beam of turquoise energy that didn't disrupt the anomaly, but instead integrated it. The crimson thread didn't dissolve. It didn't dissipate. It became. It was woven into the structure of the weaver's knot, transforming into a shimmering, intricate pattern, a testament to Sophie's skill and understanding. As the last tendril of crimson energy merged with the knot, the shaking stopped. The dome resumed its rotation. The console stabilized, and the air settled back into its previously orchestrated rhythm. The only evidence of the near catastrophe was a faint, lingering scent of ozone, and the profound understanding etched in Sophie's eyes. "It's complete," she whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of exhaustion and awe. "The weaver's knot is whole. And now, it sings a new song." Chapter 13. Echoes of the Celestial Loom. The silence following the Jubilee's near catastrophe was thick, laced with the metallic tang of ozone and the lingering shock of manipulated reality. Julian, now fully operational as the heir to Vane Chronos, moved with a quiet, almost unnerving efficiency, a stark contrast to the frantic efforts of the city's emergency services. He oversaw the stabilization of the central hub, not with panic directives, but with measured observations, his mind cataloging every disruption, every potential point of failure. The Vane executive fleet, a fleet of sleek VTOLs that seemed to defy gravity, dominated the skyline, their golden surfaces reflecting the now clear, soot-tinged twilight. His father, Silas Vane, stood beside him, a man sculpted from ice and power. The CEO's initial bow had been stiff, almost contemptuous, but now a flicker of something akin to pride, or perhaps simply the bewildered recognition of a son's capabilities, had crept into his eyes. Silas, a devotee of ancient martial philosophies, saw Julian's temporal manipulation not as a weapon, but as a refinement, an amplification of the already potent art of Liangan, the way of the flowing fist. "Impressive, Julian," Silas said, his voice a low rumble. "To wield such power with such restraint." "You've understood the core principle. Time isn't to be controlled, but harmonized." Julian inclined his head, a slight, almost involuntary movement. He wasn't accustomed to praise, not in the grandiose terms Silas offered. He preferred to analyze, to quantify, to understand the mechanics of the miracle had performed. The weaver's knot, father, proved to be a key. It wasn't simply a conduit for the anomaly, it acted as a resonant frequency, a way to actively shape the temporal distortions. He turned his attention to Sophie, who was seated in the newly constructed observatory, a breathtaking structure of polished brass and shimmering crystal. The air around her hummed with a quiet energy, subtly altered by the interwoven threads of the weaver's knot, now integrated into the very fabric of the building's design. Her eyes, no longer shrouded in darkness, were a startling, vibrant blue, reflecting the constellations above. "You see, Sophie?" Julian asked, gesturing toward the rotating dome of the observatory. "The universe doesn't merely flow, it responds. It has patterns, rhythms, and we can learn to listen." Sophie, after a moment of adjusting to the brilliance, smiled, a genuine radiant expression that hadn't touched her face in years. "It sings, Julian," she said, her voice clear and resonant. "A song of creation and destruction, of birth and decay. A song older than time itself." Silas, ever the pragmatist, interjected, "We have a considerable amount of work to do." The disruption at the hub caused a ripple effect across the city's time streams. The maintenance schedules are severely off. The precision navigation systems are experiencing temporal drift. And the clocks, well, the clocks are screaming. Julian acknowledged this with a subtle nod. He had already begun implementing a comprehensive temporal recalibration program, utilizing the weaver's knot as a diagnostic tool, and, with Sophie's guidance, a corrective mechanism. He discovered that the anomaly hadn't originated simply as a random fluctuation. It was tethered to the city's infrastructure, specifically the network of gears that drove the transit system. The core of the problem lay not in a destructive force, but in a fundamental imbalance, a dissonance in the city's temporal harmony. As he delved deeper, exploring the mechanics of the weaver's knot, Julian experienced another, sharper surge of perception. This time it wasn't triggered by external threat. Instead, it was a conscious exploration, a deliberate attempt to weave his own awareness into the temporal flow. He felt the relentless tick of the city's clocks, not as isolated beats, but as a single, vast, interconnected pulse. He saw the past, present, and potential futures of every gear. Every cog, every individual component, flickering before his eyes like 1,000 shimmering reflections. "The knot is sentient," he murmured, his voice laced with a mixture of wonder and apprehension. "It's not merely reflecting time, it's feeling it. And it's aware of me." Suddenly Marcus, driven by a petty, vindictive impulse, materialized in the observatory, flanked by 2 of Graves' remaining goons. "Well, well, well," he sneered, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Look what we have here, a fancy watchmaker, playing God." Julian didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He simply closed his eyes, and the world, for a heartbeat, ceased to exist. When he opened them, Marcus was sprawled on the floor, disoriented, his hand clutching at his head. The goons, similarly stunned, were frozen in place, staring at the brass gears spinning at the center of the weavers, not with a primal fear. "You are a disruptive element, Marcus," Julian said, his voice low and controlled. "A dissonance in the flow. Your presence alone threatens the integrity of the harmony." He didn't threaten, he stated. He simply presented an undeniable truth. The weaver's knot pulsed with a brilliant turquoise light, and the crimson threads, once fragmented, began to converge, forming a new, intricately patterned symbol, a stylized hand, reaching out to restore balance. The echoes of the celestial loom resonated through the observatory, a silent testament to the power that lay dormant within the heart of a time master, disguised as a grease-stained gear greaser. Chapter 14. The weavers, not the air in the grand observatory, hung thick with the scent of ozone and polished brass, a subtle counterpoint to the lingering metallic tang of the Jubilee explosion. Sophie, seated in her newly restored chair, tentatively reached out, her fingers hovering over the intricate workings of the weavers, not a colossal brass mechanism of interlocking gears, cogs and shimmering filaments, a testament to Julian's ability to manipulate time itself. The initial disorientation had faded, replaced by a cautious fascination. The world, once a series of disjointed sounds and shadows, now possessed a clarity she hadn't known existed, sharpened by the subtle vibrations emanating from the knot. "It's beautiful," she breathed, her voice a delicate tremor, like a captured heartbeat. Julian, observing her, continued to meticulously clean the gears with a tiny articulated tool. He was a study in quiet efficiency, a stark contrast to the chaos head unleashed. "It's more than beautiful, Sophie. It's a key to understanding the patterns, the currents, the very fabric of existence." Suddenly, Marcus' entrance shattered the serenity. He hadn't bothered to disguise his rage, his face flushed with fury. Behind him, 2 of Graves' remaining, thoroughly shaken mercenaries shuffled nervously, their eyes darting between Julian and the mesmerizing spectacle of the weaver's knot. "Well, well, well. Look what we have here, a fancy watchmaker. Playing God," he sneered, his eyes gleaming with malice. "You think you've cleaned up this city, Vane? You think you've rewritten the narrative? You're a disruptive element, a glitch in the system." Julian didn't react to the insult, his movements fluid and precise as he adjusted the calibration of a tiny escapement wheel. "Your arrogance is a significant anomaly, Marcus. You are a dissonance in the flow. Your presence alone threatens the integrity of the harmony." He didn't raise his voice, didn't even meet Marcus' gaze directly. The control was unsettling, almost unnerving. As he spoke, the weaver's knot pulsed with a brilliant turquoise light. The crimson threads, which had been scattered like tangled wires after the Jubilee, began to converge, forming a new, intricately patterned symbol, a stylized hand, reaching out to restore balance. The echoes of the celestial loom resonated through the observatory, a silent testament to the power that lay dormant within the heart of a time master disguised as a grease-stained gear greaser. Marcus, fueled by a petty, vindictive impulse, lunged forward, attempting to seize the brass gear. Let's see what you really are, huh? A clockwork toy. Instinctively, Julian moved. It wasn't a dramatic flourish, not a burst of temporal acceleration. Instead, it was a subtle shift, a barely perceptible slowing of time around Marcus. To the casual observer, it would have appeared as a slight delay in his movements, a fraction of a second where he seemed to stumble over his own feet. But Julian had done more. Had subtly altered Marcus' perception of the moment, introducing a chaotic ripple in his own internal timeline. Marcus tripped, a clumsy, uncoordinated fall that wouldn't have been noticeable under normal circumstances. But as he hit the floor, a searing pain shot through his arm. He looked down to see the brass gear, now spinning with amplified intensity, pressing into his flesh with a surprising force. It wasn't a physical blow, exactly, but a disorientation, a feeling of his own movements becoming fractured, his thoughts momentarily disjointed. What is this? He gasped, clutching his arm. The mercenaries mirrored his confusion, staring at the gear with a primal fear. The knot doesn't simply react to external threats, Julian explained, his voice now imbued with a calm authority. It responds to imbalances, to disruptions in the temporal flow. You, Marcus, represent a significant deviation. He reached out, gently manipulating the gear, causing it to spin faster, the turquoise light intensifying. Your intention to destroy, to impose your will, is a cascade of chaos. And chaos, my friend, is the enemy of time. The crimson threads of the weaver's knot solidified, the hand symbol now taking on a more defined shape, a hand reaching, not just to restore balance, but to correct it. Lines of shimmering energy pulsed outwards from the knot, enveloping Marcus and his guards, not to harm them, but to refine them. They weren't paralyzed, not restrained, but subtly altered, their aggression muted, their reflexes dampened. Sophie, watching this unfold with wide-eyed wonder, gasped, It's like a cleansing. It's taking away the bad parts." Julian stopped, the turquoise light receding slightly. "Time is not simply a linear progression," he said, turning to Sophie. "It is a tapestry of possibilities, constantly being woven and rewoven. The knot seeks to ensure the threads are aligned, the patterns maintained. Your presence, Marcus, was creating a frayed edge, threatening to unravel a whole." He paused, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "And sometimes, Sophie, the most difficult repairs require a touch of severance." With a final, precise movement, he snapped his fingers. The effect was immediate. Marcus and his guards, still disoriented and feeling a profound sense of unease, found themselves slumped on the floor, their movements sluggish, their aggression gone. They stared at Julian with a mixture of bewilderment and fear. "You are a disruptive element, Marcus," Julian said, his voice low and controlled. "A dissonance in the flow. Your presence alone threatens the integrity of the harmony." He didn't threaten, he stated. He simply presented an undeniable truth. The weaver's knot pulsed with a brilliant turquoise light, and the crimson threads, once fragmented, began to converge, forming a new, intricately patterned symbol, a stylized hand, reaching out to restore balance. The echoes of the celestial loom resonated through the observatory, a silent testament to the power that lay dormant within the heart of a time master, disguised as a grease-stained gear greaser. Chapter 15. The Calibration. The silence in the grand observatory was profound. A tangible thing thick with the scent of polishing brass and the lingering shimmer of turquoise. Marcus and his remaining guards, still draped in a bewildered stupor, were meticulously restrained, not by chains, but by intricately designed wristbands woven with the same shimmering material as the weaver's knot. They moved with a disconcerting lack of volition, their faces blank canvases reflecting the vast, meticulously crafted gears that dominated the room's center. Julian, leaning against a towering brass pendulum, observed them with a detached calmness. His father, Silas Vane, The CEO stood stiffly beside him, a picture of uncomfortable propriety, clearly struggling to reconcile the image of his son, the ruthless heir to a global empire, with this unassuming figure amidst a whirl of intricate machinery. Silas, a man whose power was measured in satellite constellations and the precise milliseconds of global communication, seemed utterly lost in this tactile, almost primitive world. "The disruption was considerable, Father," Julian said, his voice carefully neutral. Marcus' influence was a ripple in a meticulously calibrated stream. He was attempting to introduce a fundamental error into the system, a deliberate corruption of temporal flow. Silas frowned, adjusting his impeccably tailored suit. "And this severance you employed? It's unsettling. Is it ethical, Julian? To simply erase someone's agency?" Julian's gaze flickered towards Sophie, who was seated in a comfortable armchair, meticulously cleaning a tiny silver cog with a miniature brush. Her eyes, now a startlingly vibrant blue thanks to the surgeon's skill, held an unsettling depth of understanding. "Ethical is a human construct, Father. I am operating on a different scale. Marcus wasn't simply a threat, he was a variable creating an unacceptable level of chaos. My role is not to punish, but to correct, to restore the necessary equilibrium." He turned back to the wristbands, examining the pulsing turquoise threads. "The knot is stabilizing. The lingering effects of his aggression, the fractured echoes of his temporal dissonance, are being gradually absorbed. It's akin to recalibrating a faulty clock, a precise adjustment to return it to its intended accuracy." Suddenly, Sophie spoke, her voice clear and melodic. "It's not just about accuracy, Julian. It's about understanding the why. Why did he try to disrupt the flow? What was he attempting to achieve?" Julian paused, considering her words. He hadn't considered the underlying motive. Focusing solely on eliminating the immediate threat, had been operating on instinct, relying on the instinctive precision honed over decades of temporal stillness training. He sought to exploit the instability, Julian explained slowly, his fingers tracing the intricate patterns of a nearby gear. The collapse at the Grand Jubilee wasn't an accident. It was a calculated attempt to create a temporal anomaly, a fracture in the timeline. He believed he could manipulate the chaos to his advantage. "And he was drawing on something ancient?" Sophie asked, her brow furrowed slightly. "Something connected to the knot?" Julian nodded, a flicker of something akin to apprehension crossing his face. "There are echoes of that older power, vestiges of the first weavers. They understood the profound implications of manipulating time with raw force. Marcus was unknowingly channeling a diluted version of their techniques, attempting to create a localized distortion." He reached into his pocket, retrieving the broken brass pocket watch, now glowing with a faint, pulsating turquoise light. This device isn't merely a temporal regulator. It's a focal point, a conduit. It amplifies the weaver's, knot's influence. I use it to refine the calibration, to ensure the threads align with absolute precision." He raised the watch, and the turquoise light intensified, bathing the room in an ethereal glow. "The knot isn't simply a tool, Sophie. It's an awareness. It perceives the delicate balance of time, the countless paths diverging and converging. Marcus threatened to tear that balance apart." As he spoke, a subtle shift occurred in the room. The air grew noticeably still, and the grinding of the gears seemed to diminish, replaced by a faint, harmonic hum. Julian focused, channeling his energy through the watch, carefully adjusting the flow of temporal energy. "I am refining the calibration," he murmured, his voice barely audible above the hum. "I'm reinforcing the protective layers, ensuring that no further disruptions can occur. This isn't about vengeance, Sophie. It's about preservation. The preservation of the timeline itself." Silas, watching with a mixture of awe and apprehension, finally spoke, his voice subdued. "You are remarkable, Julian. Truly remarkable." Julian offered a small, almost sad smile. "I am merely a gear in the machine, Father. A gear that occasionally needs a careful recalibration." He glanced at Sophie, a silent acknowledgement of her critical role in his mission, a recognition that the true mastery lay not in brute force, but in a profound and intuitive understanding of the rhythm of time. The task wasn't about removing the bad parts, it was about ensuring the entire mechanism functioned flawlessly.